Anyway, folks, welcome to another episode of Digital Drams. Great to see so many familiar faces and new faces joining us. We hope you got your packs okay and there was no dramas joining. As I said, this is going to be, as mentioned in the blurb and when this went out, this is probably one of the most special tastings we've ever done. Not only does it have 6 samples, which is one extra than we normally do, but it also has this beautiful little cup capita. That's really kind of quality. We're also joined live from the distillery. So we got a live virtual tour of the distillery in Tullamore from Kevin. So this is really special. So Kevin and Conor, do you want to introduce yourselves? I don't know who wants to go first.
I'll introduce myself first. My name is Conor Friel, and I am the Tullamore DEW ambassador here in the UK. I started this job about 2.5 years ago. Kevin?
I thought you were going for a big, long introduction there. I wasn't expecting that. My name is Kevin Pigott. I've been working with Tullamore DEW for 10 years. I'm currently cooking in the distillery. I have a shirt and blazer on a hanger off screen, but I've opted not to wear it because it's unbearably hot in the distillery. We've had quite a warm day. But really excited to be here. And I saw someone in the chat saying that they haven't tasted much Irish whiskey. So what a treat you're in for tonight.
No, this is a great opportunity to try some extra Irish whiskey. And this is just by complete coincidence our second Irish tasting in a row. So by the end of the year, I'll have everyone won over to the real king of the game, you know. So before I hand you formally over to the lads who are going to go through our first whiskey, we're going to do it in an interesting order. I just want to, as a reminder for anyone who's joining for the first time, we do want to hear your tasting notes when we get through the whiskeys. We encourage that kind of thing, and your comments. Any questions, please do get them in, and I'll pass them on to the lads as we go. So, gentlemen, I believe we are going from starting with the 18 and working backwards, which is a reverse on how obviously these things normally tend to go.
Yeah, we said why not mix it up. We'll start with the oldest variant that we've ever released from Tullamore DEW. The oldest one that's, I guess, available on the market. I wouldn't say the oldest ever. There are some very rare old bottles out there, but Tullamore 18-year-old single malt, 4 cask finish. This bottle that I have in my hand was bottled in 2001. Distilled 2001, bottled in 2019. So my question to you is, where in the world were you in 2001 when this whiskey was a baby being distilled? Where were you living? I always like to do it because we think of different foods like cheese and meats that get aged and matured in beautiful ways, but whiskey always astounds me. We drink an 18-year-old, and for those of us who've been lucky to have 30-year-olds and so on, we kind of go, it's only an 18-year-old. And I want to be quite reflective and appreciative of how lucky we are to taste an 18-year-old whiskey. Within Irish whiskey, we don't have quite as old whiskies as some of the Scots. We were too busy drinking it, or maybe it wasn't just a case that they weren't selling some of the older stocks.
We got some lovely responses in there. We got Steph was in Italy, Matt was in Germany, Newbury, UK, said Reverend Kevin, Liverpool, just outside Inverness, London, graduating from Nottingham University, London, Stockport, Manchester, Stockport and Manchester in 2021.
Nice.
And Lewis was uni in Leeds. So taking you, see, this is a very clever start. Taking people back to their uni days.
Oh wow, we've got someone who was in chemo in Glasgow. Hopefully, you're doing a lot better. If you're on this call, it's a pretty good sign that you've done well.
Yeah,
you've
years later,
beaten it. So well done to you. That can be really shit. I saw someone saying they had a tasting in the boardroom style. That's exactly where I am. I'll go out on the still floor later and show you a little bit more, but I'm currently up on the top floor in the distillery. So thus the heat has risen. We've got 6 big kettles out there cooking a lot of heat, making whiskey, trying to keep up with demand. And what I'm going to show you behind me is the distillery that we built in 2014 in Tullamore. It's this 100 million euro distillery initially, put about 25 million on top of that now. So about 125 million total. 57 acres. It's on a bog in the Midlands, this marshy soil in the centre of Ireland, the heart of Ireland, about an hour outside Dublin. Tullamore is quite a small town. We're talking 14,000 people, 6 girls on Tinder. So just so you're aware. 2 are my cousin. So if you know any single women, you can put that in the chat. There's a private link I think Luke has set up.
Yeah.
But it's a small town. We always joke it's full of Polish food stores, Turkish barbers, Italian restaurants, Thai food. We have a lot of Thai food restaurants. Street Thai is hot right now. But we have Tullamore DEW, the second largest Irish whiskey in the world. So there's hundreds and hundreds of brands of Irish whiskey now. Some claim as high as 743 distilleries thereabouts, give or take. Luke might correct me if it's changed. I think there was one opening in Galway the other day. I think that's 43. So it's kind of crazy. But great to see Irish whiskey booming. Our brand's a little bit different. We're around 193 years, so we're not a new brand. We're not new to the category. We were an old school Irish whiskey distillery. If we go back to the 1780s, when Irish whiskey was starting to kick off in the county, as you kind of have these areas in the UK as well, these sort of counties, we would have 32 distilleries in 1780 in Offaly, this small county, which was quite significant. At the moment, we are the only one producing whiskey. So it's interesting how things have changed. A lot of our distilleries are on the coast. We source our water from nearby Slieve Bloom Mountains. If we have any Americans on the call, they always laugh because they're not mountains, they're more like hills. So we apologize, our hills/mountains are not as impressive as some of the American comparisons. In the UK, I don't know, maybe Scotland has some impressive sort of mountains. So I know I saw someone.
Yeah. They call them bends here,
Ben, there you go. But if you have taken out the whiskey, hopefully we're ready to have a little nose of the 18-year-old. And I'd love to know any tasting notes that come in the chat. We will not accept moist banana. I just want to get that out of the way. If anyone uses the word moist or banana, you will be removed from this chat. A few years ago, I had someone say moist banana and they ruined the whiskey for me for a good year. So please don't do that. For me, this is all about what single malts deliver, but in an Irish context. So single malts tend to have this fruity, fragrant element that's at their core. What we've done with this whiskey is we've aged it for 17 and a half years in a bourbon barrel, and then we've finished it in sherry, port, and Madeira, whilst leaving some of the original liquid in the bourbon. So we call it a 4-cask finish, and it has these dried fruits, sultanas, figs, maybe even baked apple. It's a fruit bomb. It is triple distilled, so if you are comparing it to some beautiful Scottish single malts like Glenfiddich, Glenlivet, Macallan, these rich single malts, maybe you're seeing that it is a lighter style as opposed to some of the more heavier, earthier whiskies that we see in Speyside and other regions within the sort of Scottish landscape. In Ireland, we love sort of triple distillation. I think it's a mistake some guys make. They think it has to be. It doesn't have to be triple distilled, but it tends to be for a lot of brands. Our whiskey's all triple distilled. Over the years, we've had one or two that we tried double distilled, but we've changed our ways and kind of still stuck with a regimen that's all triple distilled. That seems to be what we love in a flavor profile in terms of the ester development, the extra distillation, giving this sort of organic acid sort of interaction with the liquid as it distills to create these beautiful fruity esters. And this whiskey is beautiful. What I love about it is we launched it in Harrods in London, and we used to have guys come in with the clipboard and they'd have some assistant with them and they'd buy 50 bottles of whiskey. And this used to be the cheapest one. I think they were buying it 5 or 6 years ago at about £100, the cheapest bottle that they were buying. Kind of a frightening amount of wealth. But I was in a whiskey bar in London, bulling a China shop, and he had over 200 whiskies. And he said, I don't carry Irish whiskey. I don't think it's that good. So we opened up a bottle of this, and this became the very first Irish whiskey that he held in that bar. I'd love to know if anyone's been in it since COVID and have they increased their Irish whiskey. But it always shocked me when I saw such a big, beautiful collection of whiskies, but no Irish. So this
Which bar was that, Kevin?
Bull in a China shop in Shoreditch.
I know of it. I haven't been in there.
Yeah.
I was in the Black Rock whiskey bar not far from Shoreditch recently. They had a couple of Tullamore.
Nice one.
Got some great taste notes coming in there. Duncan says floral, fresh apples, vanilla. Isla says nice aftertaste of sherry and Christmas. Ian says get fresh apples initially on the nose. Stephen, quite soft and sweet. Martin and Lorraine, vanilla, fruit, slightly spicy, cinnamon, peaches, apples. very gentle nose, smooth honey sweetness. I'm getting pineapple and figs, maybe a hint of pine, says Kevin Wright. Vanilla, peachy flowers, slight spice coming through, nice and smooth. There's some great tasting notes there. Kevin, you said you launched this a few years back. When did it join the portfolio? Because I know it kind of, I think it was around 2018 or 2017 when you won the San Francisco, you won a gold medal out there, and that kind of, when it kind of really came on my radar, I was like, oh Jesus, Tullamore have some really nice aged malts, which wasn't something that was a big thing of what you did before that.
Yeah, so I mean, in the past of distilling, we made malts for sure. We had lots of iterate malts over the years. A 10-year-old, we had a 14-year-old, a different one to what we're tasting tonight. The 18 came on board in 2017, and then it was 2018 it won that sort of kind of iconic award in San Francisco, and that was, to win that sort of, I think Redbreast 21 had won it the year before, so it was a really high caliber competition to win. Some of the competitions obviously vary in sort of the quality of the credentials that you sort of attribute to them, but you're right, I think that definitely put us on the map. People who liked premium Irish whiskies but maybe hadn't range, they had our original or maybe our 12-year-old, but they hadn't found anything higher. Maybe the odd whiskey fiend had found a Tully Phoenix, one of our sort of old cast strength whiskies, but that was about it. Love some of the tasting notes there.
Yeah, we got a few more in. David says minty pine finish. Lauren says apples, cinnamon flowers, honey. Duncan's come back in with maybe some dark chocolate as well on the palate. And yeah, Martin and Lorraine back again on the palate, boozy fruit cake, sultana, spice, vanilla, flowery. Yeah, so sorry, go on.
No, I love that. It's really interesting culturally. When you do a tasting, say with the US, you get all these bakery, very cinnamony taste notes. So depending on where people are in the world, you get different language used as sort of descriptors. For instance, it's been a long time since I've seen anyone mention pine, which is interesting for me.
No, definitely. We've often chatted with anyone who does these tastings more regularly. It often comes up in our conversations about people's cultural touchstones and memories and childhood experiences that give us our kind of tasting notes. That we kind of pull out when you kind of drink a whiskey and you're like, oh, geez, that reminds me of something that you can't quite put your finger on, but it's a long way away in the back of your mind, and that's the beauty of this this drink whiskey full stop.
Absolutely. I think Conor's going to taste a whiskey later, and I think he gave me the tasting note. He said Banoffee once before, and we had groups from other parts of the world that didn't know what that was, so they were all googling it in the room, and we forgot how sort of UK and Ireland centric some of these maybe desserts are. But
yeah, Mel's in there with Danish pastry, cinnamon apple strudel. Cinnamon apple strudel is one that comes up quite a lot, and one that I've no reference for. And then a spicy finish. So you get away with banoffee, but you don't get away with mushy bananas or moist bananas. So that's a double standard, Kevin.
It's just the word moist that puts me off. I think it is. If I forget, please put it in the chat. With each whiskey, we'll say a toast. Okay. So we'll start with one that I quite like. They used to say it in Ireland at a time of war, and it was to get people to stop fighting. So, an eye for an eye, a hand for a hand. Trust in the music and strike up the band. For the more that we sing, the less that we fight. Time and again proves to be right. Cheers.
Beautiful. All my toasts are just incredibly crass and rude. So.
Oh, we're getting there, Luke. Don't you worry. You just, if anyone has gentle or small ears near them, just you might pick your moment and gently tell them to go outside for a moment and walk the dog.
Marvelous. So I mean, we've sat with this one for a few minutes now. I don't know if we want to, if there's anything you want to touch on before we move on, or if there's another moment you want to address. Or
no, that was perfect. That was sort of the starting point. I wanted to bring people back in time with 2001 to talk that it is our rarest variant, the sort of oldest age statement that Tullamore has. We won't do it forever. Unfortunately, it won't continue forever. So at some point it will fizzle off into the background. So if you do like it, it's worth keeping an eye on it. How much is it?
Well, we're £94, I believe, but
oh, wow.
you will get a discount so at the end of this tasting, for anyone who's doesn't already know, I'll be giving out a code that gives you 15% off all the whiskies in this range, except for the one that the Rouge, which is we don't sell. That's a duty-free exclusive that we have on here. So you'll get a 15% off that on top of that. So yeah.
Nice one. Yeah, we're selling it for a lot more in the shop, so I'm glad I didn't say the price here.
Well, what's the price if you're visiting the distillery?
To be fair, yeah, it's 140, I think, 140. So it is expensive euros. It's the most expensive one we have. It's just down to we've so little stock of it. That's probably it. All of our other whiskies are a bit more modestly priced. We don't try as a brand. We don't try and go into the super esoteric, crazy prices. We like people to be able to afford the whiskey and enjoy it and drink it. For me,
as anyone listening here would know, the whiskey shop is famous for being the cheapest around.
Oh yeah, turn off the chat there for a minute, quick, before we get inundated with abuse. Right, so the next whiskey we're going to move on to is actually a very similar DNA in liquid. It's the Tullamore DEW 14-year-old. It's the same ABV, which is 41.3%, oddly specific. It's a 4-cask finish. It's the same maturation regimen and liquid as the 18, except it's 4 years younger. So I'm really curious, and particularly in the chat, if you could put which you prefer, the 14, the 18. And I think the key difference is that the 14 just has a little more emphasis on the fruit. You see more pear drops, you see more apricot. I think the wood takes on a little bit more of an effect in the 18-year-old, but I'm curious if you discern a difference that's similar to that, how I've described it, or different. I think some of the tasting notes from the first one hold true for this too, because it's a similar cask. It's the exact cask regimen. So we're talking about Porsche, sherry, Madeira, giving influence on top of that sort of oaky vanilla note.
Well, we've already got a tasting note there saying lighter and more floral. There's something there like that's not in the first one that catches me straight away that I can't quite put my finger on.
Wood derived or ester fruit?
Pardon?
Do you think it's more wood derived or is it more sort of estery fruity?
It's definitely more estery fruity. Yeah, it's almost like I don't know, like a dried apricot or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something of that dimension, yeah.
Well, pear drops, says Kevin Wright. So yeah, maybe that's kind of boiled sweet, kind of fruity flavor. Duncan says I get more mint methanol on the nose. So this is becoming a theme for the night. Who needs Wrigley's? We've got Tullamore. And Lisa's defo minty. Martin Lorraine on the nose, woody, stored apples, sweet red berries. It's definitely like a stewed apple ness, which I actually get off the blend whenever I have it. There's kind of like a cooked apple flavor.
Yeah, for me, getting in that baked apple direction. Stewed apple's interesting.
Pear, says Tim, and yeah, fruity but with some earthiness like heather. I haven't met her, but I'll take your word for it, Kevin.
She sounds good. But this whiskey, I think when we think of the glasses we're using, the Glencairns, obviously there's different options. I think Luke has a slightly different glass there. He was showing me before, sort of sherry snifter style.
I rock all the glassware.
Oh, you rock all. You've got a glass. Yeah, so find the one that works for you. But I find these are brilliant, particularly for the first try of one, the more appreciative moment. I do tend at home then to drink them in rocks glasses. Sometimes they're nice crystal sort of glasses that have been gifted. But I do, from an exploration standpoint, love these, but not when I don't tend to use them as much when I'm at home with something I'm quite familiar with. I know everyone's a bit different on that front.
Jeff says 18 is a lot smoother. The 14 has a lot more going on. And Scott says toffee, cinder instantly. So that's a good tasting note, Scott. And that's interesting, Jeff. I get what you mean. I personally am a bit allergic to the word smoother. But I totally get that. It's kind of more easygoing. It's a slower burner. It gets more complex the more you sit with it. Whereas this is straight away there's a bit something more that dances in the front of the tongue with the 14 right up front.
So our toast for this one: come guess me this riddle. What beats pipe and fiddle? What's hotter than mustard and milder than cream? What best wets your whistle? What's clearer than crystal? Sweeter than honey and stronger than steam? What can make the lame walk? What can make the dumb talk? What's the elixir of life and philosopher's stone? And what helped Mr. Brunel to dig the Thames tunnel? Sure wasn't it whiskey from old Tullamore? So stick to the crater, the best thing in nature, for drowning your sorrows and raising your joys. And boy, I'd half wonder if whiskey and thunder was made from the plunder of whiskey, me boys. Cheers.
Well said.
If you go on YouTube and you type in crater, Conor, you might have to put that in the chat for them. It's this, there's an old, and Hosier, the Irish singer, did a song version of it. He sings it really beautifully. I thought about singing and I said, no, I haven't had enough whiskeys yet. I might sing towards the end.
No, the Hosier version is very good, yeah.
And it's a much longer piece, actually, if you find it online. It has a few verses, and it's very characteristic of an age gone by in Ireland, these sort of storytellers in pubs bringing people to life. And much like in parts of England, the pubs were museums you could drink in, these beautiful old pubs, the Dog and Duck, the Fox and Hound, the multitude of this and that names that sort of tend to be beautiful watering holes for people to meet and chat and tell stories. And if anyone has any good toasts, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll see if I've come across them or not.
Definitely, great suggestion. In the meantime, Martin and Lorraine have got a few more tasting notes in there. So we got taste sweet, treacly, stewed pears and apples, develop slowly, a tiny hint of aniseed. Doran says definitely more minty and strong, floral, lighter than on the 18-year-old. Not long started collecting whiskey, says Lee, and doing tasting. Haven't got a dram glass yet. You'd have to get one. Maybe you can buy them at thewhiskeyshop.com. Sweeter, says Doran. Adam says lighter initially, but more spice the more I have. Duncan then says the 18 has more of the Ranco flavor than you find in cognac. Reverend Kev said that the 18 was unctuous, and I'd agree with that. This is not. The 14-year-old has a narrower taste bandwidth than the 18. The 14 is sharper, I feel. Loving the toasts, says Reverend Kevin Wright. I don't think we can match yours, Kevin. I suppose that's in response to the suggestion for some toasts. Apple and cinnamon on the nose, toffee on the taste. Prefer the 18, says Carol. And spicy finish, says David. Then finally, Jim says not very applicable here, but here's to those who wish us well, and those who don't care can go to hell. So that's a toast from Jim. Well said, Jim.
Nice one, Jim. Clove. Where were you guys? So funny enough, I'm thinking, where were you all when I was during lockdown? I was coming up with trying to create a machine in the distillery that blends your own whiskey. So we had to create a series of flavor decisions which would influence what elements of whiskey you would get in your final blend. So Tullamore, some of the whiskies we're going to taste, that Conor is going to taste with us, are triple blends. They're made of 3 styles of whiskey. Single malt, you're very familiar with what we're drinking now, a style quite famous in Ireland called single pot still, and the third being single grain. So all those 3 come together in our sort of classic original, our rum cask and the 12-year-old. So that's the triple blend, and some of that whiskey being made in the stills behind me. You can still see the sun coming in on the stills. It looks like it's daytime. It's obviously 8 o'clock in Ireland, so it's kind of a bright summer's evening. But that blend, I guess, that we're talking about is quite interesting in the context of when you go abroad, you go to Scotland, you see a lot of double blends, and the grain, the malt, the pot still is quite unique to Ireland. Even within Ireland, there's very few whiskies that tend to be all 3, and we'll touch on a little bit of that later. But hopefully that influences where some of the flavors that are coming out in the chat, the sort of spicy oiliness, some of this on the later whiskies will come from some of the pot still element, the fruity characteristics from the malt, the light, sweet, floral notes, sometimes from the grain. So when I'd visit a lot of distilleries during COVID, or before COVID, I should say, I saw a lot of them had a fill your own cask, and it was really nice, beautiful whiskey, specially selected, usually a higher ABV. And I felt that I didn't get to input on what the whiskey was like. So essentially in Tullamore, we created a whiskey that allows a machine that blends the whiskey for you. So you pick green apple over pear drops, raisins over tobacco, clove over wood. So we would pick different flavor notes, and based on what you picked, it would dial up more of a certain component of the whiskey that reflected that flavor. So the idea is the end product, what you get out, should be a personalized whiskey for you based on the 7 or 8 flavors you've picked. Now, because we know a lot of people who are into whiskey and who visit the distillery know a lot, we also give them an option that they can pick the exact proportions of malt, pot still, and grain to make their own whiskey. So that's something that was one of the COVID projects, and I was sitting down writing endless amount of tasting notes for all the different components and making sure they were true to the liquid. And with all the injection of words here, I could have done with you mid lockdown, guys. Here,
but it sounds like really cool, Kevin. I mean, it's like a choose your own adventure, but with whiskey, like, you know.
Indeed. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on to the next whiskey. So
this is going to be the 13-year-old Rouge.
Exactly.
I was lucky enough to get an advanced taste of this off you at Whiskey Live Dublin. So thanks for that.
No worries. This is the bottle. We actually went a little bit different with how we designed the label to make it reflect a little bit of a French vineyard. Rouge obviously is the French word for red because we used a red wine cask. So it's a 13-year-old single malt aged in bourbon barrels, but finished for 6 months in a Bordeaux wine cask from Pomerol. Pomerol is barely even a town. It's the tiniest appellation in Bordeaux, has a church and a few vineyards. Some of the wine bottles online, if you look up, Pomerol bottle could set you back 175 quid. It can be quite expensive, quite hard to get your hands on. Very few whiskies tend to use it. But it gives it this little bit of a rosé tinge. It's French oak, so that's worth bearing in mind for the Pomerol. So it does have this little bit of French oak spice. You've got, for me, berries, cherries, perhaps. I'm really interested to see what people think of this one in terms of tasting notes, but it's quite light. We wanted this to be a whiskey for red wine drinkers, in the sense I wanted to keep the ABV at 40%. We wanted it to be triple distilled, and we wanted it to have a soft imprint of wine, not this overpowering that would take away from the delicate nature of the whiskey in and of itself.
I always got a lot of kind of fig and honey on it, and then definitely the tannins on the finish. I noticed it's like a very kind of dry finish.
Yeah,
the
good one on the
tannins are what I
tannins.
noticed straight away. Scott says intense dark fruit and wood. Duncan's got a tasting note and a compliment. He says definitely cherries, lovely nose. So yeah, it's much lighter than the first two. It kind of dissipates off the tongue slightly quicker, like, you know.
Agreed.
Mel says bubblegum. That's a good tasting note, yeah.
Bubblegum. Interesting.
I often get bubblegum with a lot of kind of heavily PX whiskies. Just something on the finish can kind of be a bit bubblegummy, like a Dunville's 12, like, you know.
Yeah, no, I definitely get it with some whiskies. I've heard people say juicy fruits for our original, so I am with you.
Martin and Lorraine says nose, woody, sweet, cherry, drops a hint of mint. That's got to be the theme for the night.
Mint and menthol, yeah.
Reverend Kevin White says subtle light nose, evocative of oak, of old oak paneling. And Gary says much sweeter, sweet cherry, says Reverend Kevin White. Yeah, like a damn fine cherry pie.
Nice. So yeah, just a little bit about the wine. So the wine would spend about 2 years in these barrels. It's typically a blended grape variety of Merlot and Cab Franc. That's what you kind of get on that side of Bordeaux, on that side of the river. All the wines coming from that sort of single source, and then we're finishing it. So actually we have some staves that we show you typically on the tours. And what's quite nice is you get to see the imprint. It looks like we've painted the inside the barrels red. And it's funny, you don't necessarily get that with some other barrels for whatever reason, certain things you use. We've obviously done lots of trials with different wines. Some don't work so well. Sweet dessert wines can work really well. It depends on your whiskey and your palate. We've tried some white wine whiskeys with whiskies and they haven't worked. The red wine seems to work really well so far. This was our second one. We did a Cab Sav from California before, which was a small trial in our visitor center. and people really like that. They loved the soft fruity notes. They love the little tinge of the wine making an imprint on the final product. When we take it out of the cask, it looks quite rouge, quite red, quite intense. Obviously, by bringing it down to 40%, it loses some of that intensity of color. But yeah, when you take it out, it's really making quite a significant impact. Obviously, the European oak, the French and the Spanish oak tends to be more porous. So you do get this rich sort of influx of both tannins, but whatever residue has been infused in the cask before tends to come on a lot quicker.
It's interesting because I mean I could be wrong here, but even in with a lot of even French wines, they tend to use American oak, you know, because I suppose they want more of a neutral flavor when they're maturing it out. So it's interesting that the wood is so red, and that it was European oak. It's different.
Yeah, it is, because you do see your oak Sauvignon Blanc exactly like that. They're afraid to over oak it. We did a little bit of work. Obviously, one of the guys behind this was our French cooper, so he had a lot of influence in bringing some of his nationality pride into it in as many ways as possible, I suspect. So, but I think that might be a good moment to briefly share a video of the cooperage. So we've built a cooperage. There's only 3, I think, of them in Ireland out of 43 distilleries that I'm aware of. Maybe a 4th doing a little bit of ad hoc work for people, but it's really nice to see cooperages coming back into the fold. So I'm going to share a quick little video, and hopefully Luke might give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can hear the sound, and then I'll let it play.
Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully that gives you a little insight into some of the tools they're using. It's kind of cool. Like, a lot of them are using very old school tools. It's the only modernized thing is tracking. So we scan barcodes. We can tell this is a bourbon barrel from Jim Beam. It's been used once, and we can track barrels. So say a barrel's leaked 3 times, we're able to scan it, go, hey, this barrel's leaked 3 times, always on the bung. Therefore, we should remove that stave. So it allows us to have much better tracking quality of everything we get, if it came from Kelvin Cooperage or wherever it came from, about the oak species, everything. So it's really nice to get that sort of traceability on it. But it also, in the old days, in old distilleries, there was a lot more what was in that barrel before, a little bit of guessing. Now that it's got a lot more serious, a lot more intense sort of tracking. So that's where the sort of modern element has come in. But the the fundamentals of building, repairing barrels is still there. So
Hmm.
lads are great. The two local lads we hired as apprentice are 19 years old. So I went out drinking with them a few weeks ago, and talk about cultural differences. I was making jokes from movies from 20 years ago, and I was like, they were 1 year old. They didn't even, they weren't even familiar. So I felt old. I went out drinking with them and their friends, and I felt like the old parent. It was terrible for a 32-year-old to feel old, but they were talking about TikTok and things that I have very little interest in. But it was funny to see that big of a cultural difference within a relatively short age span.
Yeah, but don't ask them where they were in 2001.
They were a twinkle in someone's eye, or they were a holiday in Spain.
Yeah. Well, my highlight from the video was the fact that you had Richard Dunn in there, which was a nice surprise, because it said a heading machine. The Scott says, feeling the backing track. Reverend Kevin writes, I love the juxtaposition of old trad skills with technology. Duncan says, that looks like a proper day's work. It must be very satisfying. What is the backing track? Does it have a name? Is it on Spotify?
I'll find out. I don't know.
Scott says, proper barrel making, though, a few machines being used there. Mel says, nice for newbies to whiskey, not so fiery, just a slight afterburner, I suppose, is back, getting us back on track to talk about the whiskey. Before we finish this drop, because mine's nearly gone, do you have another toast for this one, Kevin?
Absolutely. And I will jump in on the machine thing. So there was a blue sort of machine that all it does is drive the hoops down tighter because we stack them so high. So a lot of the machines are, I guess, doing sort of basic quality stuff, but the coopers literally are still building the barrels, shaving down the staves, or refixing the hoops, replacing rusty ones. So it is super old school when you're in there. And the physicality, one thing you'll notice about coopers, although the young ones tend to be quite lean, their forearms tend to get very physically strong because they're holding, a 8 pound sort of 3 or 4 kg hammer for 8 hours a day. So one of them is so proud of his job. He has his Tinder picture is him in a Tullamore DEW top, so he gets slagged a lot in work for it because he's told every girl in town he's the apprentice cooper, which he is, to be fair. So let him use it. But it was very talk about. Well, I'd be telling everyone I was the head cooper, so to each their own. The toast we shall
you
use.
Could say I'm the apprentice cooper at work, but for you, I'm the head cooper.
Yes.
You could, when you're just before you do the toast, what you were saying about the strong forearms, it reminds me that if you're working all day with your right arm, you could be like Homer Simpson in that dumbbell episode, where...
Exactly. We'll have to get that link in the chat. So may you be rich in blessing, poor in misfortune, slow to make enemies, and quick to make friends. Cheers.
Cheers. Duncan says, how many of the 6 girls has he dated?
Oh God, we might even have overlapped, Duncan. I'm afraid to ask. God help us.
Carl says, I drink to myself and another, and this is a toast, sorry. I drink to myself and another, and may that other be he who drinks to himself and another, and may that other be me. So very nice.
Tongue twister. Yes, there's a few of those in the deep archives of toasts online. I'll say one of them maybe later. So I'm going to pass over to Conor now, who's going to talk about our 12-year-old special blend. And I'll turn off my camera and I'm going to get set up on a mobile device and be out on the still floor once he finishes the whiskey. I expect a toast from you too now, Conor. So keep no pressure.
Luckily, I've got 2 toasts prepared, and you haven't used any of them, thankfully.
Imagine
they're the only 2 that I know.
Oh, crap. I should have used them just to put you under pressure. Okay.
I did steal both of them from you, so thank you for that.
Over to you.
So Kevin has just chatted through the malts in our portfolio. However, what Tullamore DEW is really best known for are our blends. We believe in the beauty of blend, and we're going to taste this one now. This is the Tullamore DEW 12-year, and this is a triple blend of the 3 styles of Irish whiskey: pot still, malt, and grain. So the remaining whiskies that we're going to try are all blends, and as I said, that's what Tullamore DEW is kind of renowned for, is our blends. We believe in the beauty of blend. We were actually the distillery that created Ireland's first blended whiskey, and that was developed by a guy called Desmond Williams, who was Daniel Edmund Williams' great grandson. So I'll just chat a little bit about the bottle here. If you look at the front of the bottle, you'll see it says Tullamore DEW. So the Tullamore is the town where the whiskey is distilled, and the D.E.W, those are actually the initials of Daniel Edmund Williams, who was like the general manager who made the whiskey what it was. He was like a real innovator, a pioneer. He was like the Elon Musk of Irish whiskey, basically, way back in the 19th century. And he kind of like made the distillery what it was. And it was then his grandson, Desmond Williams, who developed Ireland's first blended whiskey. He'd basically gone to the bourbon belt in the United States, and he'd seen kind of grain whiskey production over there, and had the idea to bring some grain stills to the plant of Tullamore and create Ireland's first blended whiskey. The Scots had really embraced blends at this point, whereas the Irish whiskey producers were very kind of reluctant to create blended whiskies. At this point, all Irish whiskey would have been pot still whiskey. But Desmond Williams was the first guy to create Ireland's blend. And as I said, that's what Tullamore DEW is known for. It's a blend of pot still, malt, and grain whiskey. Kevin's kind of touched a little bit on pot still, but pot still is a style of whiskey that is unique to Ireland. And it kind of differs from malt whiskey in that the mash bill is malted and unmalted barley. Our pot still whiskey is a mash bill of 50% malted, 50% unmalted barley. And as I said, that's a style of whiskey that is unique to Ireland. And the unmalted barley gives pot still whiskey a kind of like a unctuousness or an oiliness, and a lot of spice. Then there's also malt whiskey in there. We make our malt whiskey from 100% malted barley. And then there's grain whiskey in there as well. And our grain whiskey is made from, it's about 95% wheat and then 5% malted barley. So those are the three whiskeys. And it will become a kind of theme throughout this presentation is the number 3 and the power of 3, because there are 3 whiskeys. They're all triple distilled, and then they're triple cask matured. So we use 3 different types of casks to mature our blends made from 2 different types of wood. We use American oak, Quercus alba, and we use European oak, Quercus robur. The European oak is what goes into the sherry butts, which are like massive, big barrels. And then we also use American oak, which is in the bourbon barrels. We use what are called B1s and B2s. So a B1 is basically a barrel that has been used to mature bourbon over in the United States. So literally that barrel was used to mature, let's say, Jim Beam, shipped over to Ireland. We put Irish whiskey in it. That's called a B1. Then when we take that whiskey back out and put more whiskey in it, it's called a B2. So we use the B1s, the B2s, which are ex-bourbon barrels made out of American oak. And then we also use sherry butts, which are made out of European oak to mature our whiskey. And it gives our whiskey a tremendous amount of complexity. So there's three whiskeys in here, all triple distilled and then triple cask matured. The major difference between this one here and the Tully original, which is what Kevin Pigott is going to talk about later on, is that this has a higher percentage of that pot still whiskey. So the pot still whiskey kind of gives our whiskeys spice, the grain whiskey gives our whiskeys sweetness, and the malt whiskey gives our whiskeys kind of fruitiness. That's to kind of simplify it. This one here has twice the amount of pot still as a Tully original. And this has about 20% pot still whiskey, 60% grain whiskey, and then the remainder is malt whiskey. And that really shows whenever you nose it on the palate as well. It's a very spicy whiskey. And it's also got kind of like chocolate or cacao notes. That's what I kind of get. We call it like a praline whiskey. And so it's a very spicy whiskey. The finish is very long. And then it will also have that kind of nice creaminess. And that's, again, due to that pot still whiskey, that kind of like slightly thicker whiskey with the spice. We do also mature more of those 3 whiskeys in those European barrels. So in those European oak barrels, the sherry butts. And that's, again, to kind of double down on that spice. We're really going for spice here with this whiskey, which I'm sure you'll probably pick up. So we mature more of the grain whiskey, more of the malt whiskey, and more of the pot still whiskey in those European oak sherry butts. There is still some whiskey in there that's matured in the B1s and the B2s, obviously, but it's a very spicy whiskey, very kind of thick, kind of almost unctuous. It's got kind of like nice dark chocolate and cacao notes, and it is a triple blend. And it's also John Quinn is the other global ambassador. This is probably John Quinn's favorite whiskey. So I'd be kind of interested to hear what you guys think of this here, given that it's a triple blend of the 3 styles of Irish whiskey. You've been drinking our malts up until now. Do you really kind of notice much of a difference between this whiskey and the previous ones?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very different. Yeah, it's very interesting, and that was really well put. Although I take issue with the musk idea. I think that's a very unfair comparison. I think Musk's never invented anything in his life. The guy's a fraud. So Scott says almost a Turkish delight in the nose, which is a great tasting note. And we have very ripe fruit in the nose, banana toffee, nostalgic nose, like old leather or walking into an old house with lots of oak furniture. Martin and Lorraine says on the nose, very sweet, fresh acorns, raisins, ginger, chocolate creamy, says Mel. It just keeps giving. I can't place half of it. Very nice dram. Yogurt coated bananas as well, says Duncan. I get banana toffee too, buttery chocolate, very creamy, ginger hit on the back of the tongue. Toffee, this is very complex to me, very nice. Banana bread with dark chocolate, and a very well balanced dram. And I've got two people who agree with my must jab, so there you go. No, that's brilliant. It's a lovely dram.
So I suppose I'll at this point I'll give you a bit more background on the history of the distillery. So the distillery was actually opened in 1829 by a guy called Michael Malloy, and he opened the original distillery in the heart of Tullamore town. And as Kevin alluded to there, then that distillery was in operation up until 1954, at which point the original distillery in the heart of Tullamore town ceased production. And that was because Irish whiskey was basically hit by a number of detrimental factors. Basically, whenever Ireland got independence from the UK, that was a whole export market that was gone. That we couldn't export to the UK anymore. And then also prohibition in the United States during the 1920s was another like big blow to Irish whiskey, because we were exporting a lot of it at that point. But between losing the ability to export to the UK market and losing the ability to export to the United States, that kind of really knocked Irish whiskey. And as I said, the Scots at this point had really embraced blending, and that kind of embraced creating blended whiskies with either, well, it would have been with malt and grain, whereas the Irish whiskey distillers, as I said, were very kind of reluctant to part ways with their beloved pot still whiskey. And that was kind of like what led to the original Tullamore distillery closing in 1954. But then whenever the brand was acquired by William Grant in 2010, they basically decided that they were going to bring whiskey distillation back to the town of Tullamore, back to its ancestral home. And they opened that the brand new state-of-the-art distillery in 2014. So bringing whiskey distillation back to the town of Tullamore for the first time in 60 years. And as Kevin said, it's an absolutely fantastic site. State of the art. Basically, whenever they were building the distillery, obviously William Grant owned Glenfiddich, they own Kendrick's Gin, they own the Balvenie. They basically consulted with all of the distillers and operations staff and were like, if you could build your dream distillery, what would it look like? And that distillery is basically the Tullamore distillery. It's like the most efficient, I'd say, distillery in the world. It's a grain to glass distillery. We do everything on site, which is again very unique. There's a lot of whiskey distilleries they'll distill it on one site and then they'll age it on another site and then they could bottle it on another site, which obviously isn't very environmentally friendly, whereas we do absolutely everything on site at Tullamore. And as Kevin said, we do have a cooperage as well, one of 3 cooperages in Ireland, because again, we like to do everything on site. We like to have complete control over the production of our whiskey, so that we can ensure that it's of the absolute highest quality. And then, as I said, the D.E.W, that stands for Daniel Edmund Williams. He started working at the distillery at the age of 14. And he basically rose up to become the general manager after 10 years. So he was the general manager at the age of 24, 25. And he, as I said, he was a pioneer. He brought like electric lighting to the town of Tullamore. He brought some of the first telephones to Tullamore. He was the first person who had trucks delivering his whiskey in Tullamore. He was a real visionary, real pioneer. And that's why his initials are on the front of the bottle there. So Daniel Edward Williams, general manager, not the founder.
I have an aunt who's a pioneer. She'd be horrified if her name was on a bottle of whiskey. I think that's a different type of pioneer.
My mother's actually a pioneer as well.
Yeah. Do you know that John Teeling's actually a pioneer? Like, but as in he doesn't drink whiskey, like, yeah, he doesn't drink alcohol. But...
Wow, that's mad.
And it's considering the influence he's had on Irish whiskey, it is mad. We got a few more comments in there. Mel says, very nice, totally different from the previous. We'll definitely be getting one of these and one of the previous. Martin Lorraine says, I put this one in first place so far this evening. and we got agreed Martin and agreed with Martin and Lorraine there as well. You said he was one of the first people to blend Irish whiskey, or the first. When would that have been?
So he went over to America around the 1940s. So it was at some point towards the end of the 1940s that he was creating a blend.
That's interesting.
And it did very well, but obviously the Irish whiskey market at that point, the demand for it wasn't there. So that's why, in spite of the fact that he, created this blend and it was doing very well, there just wasn't enough demand there to keep the distillery open. So the distillery then closed not long after that in 1954. Obviously, there were still whiskey stocks from all of the distillation that had been happening. There was still whiskey maturing, so we were still selling whiskey past 1954, but the actual distillery itself closed in 1954. But the brand stayed alive. That the brand was sold to Powers in Dublin. It kind of changed hands a few times after that. The brand stayed alive the whole time, and then whiskey distillation was then brought back to the town of Tullamore in 2014, which was great. But a lot of other Irish whiskey brands just disappeared at that point. And Irish whiskey was kind of like the premier whiskey in the world back in the 18th and 19th centuries. Even some of the Scotch whiskey producers would have admitted to that, and then had like a real big fall, which is unfortunate. And like the industry was really kind of devastated. But luckily, Tullamore was one of the brands that survived. And now it's it's back in its hometown. With a new state-of-the-art distillery going from strength to strength. So I'm glad you guys have liked that there, the Tullamore DEW 12 year. As I said, it's kind of like a praline whiskey, lots of kind of nuttiness and a lot of spice. And it is a triple blend of the 3 styles of Irish whiskey: pot still, malt and grain, triple cask matured, and then also triple distilled. So at this point, I am going to pass it over to Kevin, who should be in our amazing still house, hopefully. Kevin, are you there?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
We can. You're a small bit quiet, but we can definitely hear you.
Can you hear me now? Is that better? Still quiet?
It's still a bit quiet.
Yeah.
How about now?
Yeah, that's a lot better.
That's a lot better.
So you can hear me?
Yeah, we can. Everyone can hear okay.
So although you can hear me, because I've gone off my headphones, I can't really hear you. So if you can save questions, just put them in the chat. I'll answer them when I come back. So I'm just going to walk through the process to touch on what Conor talked about. We are a state-of-the-art modern distillery with all the sort of cons. We use rainwater to clean the distillery, so we reduce a dramatic amount of water usage. We have closed water loop systems, heat exchangers, We use techniques like thermal vapor recompression to reuse the heat from the third distillation for the second and first. We have a myriad of other things that we do. Within the William Grant portfolio, we'd be one of the most efficient distilleries. We're pretty obsessed with that. We have Origin Green status. So that's a sort of sustainability gold member status within Ireland. But at the end of the day, we're a distillery. We use a lot of energy. So we don't put anything publicly out about sustainability. We recognize we're a whiskey distillery. We can't be walking around telling people we're the nicest people in the world. We use a lot of energy to make our whiskey. So that's a reality. Let's call a spade a spade. That's what it is. Like that you mentioned, John Teeling, he actually came to the distillery this week. He heard our new tour was going really well. So him and his wife come down to see it themselves. So nice that he made the time to come down and visit a distillery. So here's our mash tun. This is where we cook our grain inside for about 3.5 hours. Thereabouts at different temperatures. We're extracting the sugar as we convert our starch through sort of gelatinization over to fermentable sugars in the form of wort. We have a second vessel after the mash tun called the lauter tun. That just acts like a sieve. It drains the liquid through. The residual grain left gets fed to an animal plant. So they use it for high protein feeds. Feed about 5,000 cows, about 4,000 pigs a week. So that's what that feed is used for, just in the single malt and pot plant. Then we move over. This is all stainless steel German Steinecker brewing equipment. These are our 12 fermenters. So we're fermenting for 3 days. Conor talked about the power of 3. So these are our fermenters. We'll have a little look inside one here. Hopefully you can get a sense of it. The liquid bubbling away. The more bubbles, the more sort of, I guess, excited the liquid is. It's feeding on the sugars, converting the alcohol. So Conor alluded to 3 styles of whiskey, but we make 2 here. I apologize, it's loud because they're all on. So we've got 3 stills on each side. On my left side, you've got the single pot still. This is our wash still right in front of me. Then we 5 hours, 7 and 11. That's our triple distillation of the single pot still. And this is the spirit safe, some of the liquid coming off the still. Hopefully you can see that. And if we flip around here on this side, we'll see this is some actual spirit being collected going into probably a barrel on Monday morning, okay? On this side, we have the single malt, our first distillation, 5 hours, our second about 7, and then our third about 11 hours. So handcrafted, handmade copper stills made by Foresight in Scotland. It's African copper, it comes from Zambia. So hand beaten, hand shaped. They're not made by engineers and rolled in machine, handmade, and 100% copper. We use copper for our our condensers. They're shell and tube condensers as well. Some distilleries will use stainless steel here. We still believe it has an effect on stripping out some of those sulfur compounds from our liquid. Apologies if I run into some of the staff. I usually scare them at night. We distill through the night and they don't expect anyone to be here. So I frighten the hell out of them. This is looking out over the grounds. So you've got our column stills in the distance, our grain distillery. You've got our bottling plant in front, and in the distance, you can't really see it in the picture. You've got 10 warehouses. They can hold about 50,000 barrels each. If I have a cheeky look in here, hopefully the light comes on. Well, maybe not. There we go. So 1 year in the distillery, we have 11.6 million MLA, milliliters of absolute alcohol. We fill about 90,000 barrels a year. Last year, we sold 18.5 million bottles. In Ireland, a measure of whiskey is about 35.5 mils. So that works out at 364 million glasses of whiskey a year. That's about 10 shots a second. It's quite significant for a small town with 6 girls on Tinder. Not so bad. Cool. So that's a little bit from the still floor. I'm going to hand back to Conor, who's going to talk about the Tullamore DEW XO. And when we turn back on the camera, I'll be in the blending lab for the last part. Okay. Thanks, Luke.
Thank you. That's really impressive. Yeah, there's a few comments there just before we jump back to Conor there. Scott says, loving Conor's knowledge. We got, come on then, let's have a full ESG report on some of Kevin's earlier environmental reporting. Quite amazing, really, as a bill. Steph says, yes, it's incredible. What a site. Absolutely amazing, says Lee. Very impressive. Fabulous distillery. Love the tour. Looks amazing. One for the bucket list. Mel has said, I don't want to put down on tonight's tasting, but with the way the economy is going in the UK and the amount of newer reinstated whiskey distilleries, like in the 70s and 80s. But maybe that's one for the end of the chat. Conor, do you want to do the Caribbean cask?
I will, of course. Thank you for that tour, Kevin. That was very, very informative. If anyone has any questions about our distillery, we'll be happy to field them at the end. As Kevin said, the distillery is now open to the public. That opened this year. So if you're ever in Ireland, Tullamore is not too far from Ireland. You'd be well advised to hop on a train and have a look around our amazing state-of-the-art distillery. But now we're going to taste the next whiskey in the lineup, and that is the Tullamore DEW XO, a whiskey with Irish heart and Caribbean soul. Irish heart, Caribbean soul. And the Caribbean soul comes from the rum cask finish. So this is another triple blend of pot still, malt and grain, the 3 styles of whiskey, the 3 styles of Irish whiskey. They would have been matured for about between 5 and 6 years, each of those 3 styles. And then they're finished in a Caribbean rum cask. So it's a Demerara rum. It's a very kind of thick, viscous rum. And it's from Guyana. And basically the casks are seasoned for 3 months with this rum. And then the whiskey is then finished for a further 3 months. And that kind of gives this whiskey a very, very tropical nose, a very, very distinctive nose. It's got kind of like banana, toffee, and that'll be the banana and kind of toffee are what a lot of people pick up on. And that's from that rum cask finish. It's a very, very kind of like versatile whiskey. So whenever I'm going out into bars, I usually do like a daiquiri challenge where I'll take their house pour rum and I'll use that to make daiquiris, and then I'll use the Tullamore DEW XO to make daiquiris, just to kind of emphasize the point that it does work very, very well as in kind of rum-based drinks. Such is the kind of like power of that rum cask finish. What I like about Irish whiskey with the rum cask finish is that because Irish whiskey is triple distilled and it is lighter in style, it does let the rum cask finish kind of shine through, and it does let the rum notes shine through. Whereas if you have a Scotch and it's finished in rum cask, let's say our Belvedere 14 year, you're kind of always aware of the fact that you're drinking a Scotch. You're never kind of like led to believe that you're drinking a rum. Whereas this here, as I said, in its daiquiri, will behave exactly like a rum. And for that reason, it's very, very versatile whiskey. But it is a triple blend of the 3 styles of Irish whiskey, and then it is then finished in those rum casks. There is a very good reason why we've decided to finish an Irish whiskey in rum casks, and that is because back in the 16th and 17th centuries, loads and loads of Irish people emigrated to the Caribbean, and they took their knowledge of whiskey distillation with them whenever they went. And they ended up basically working on the sugar plantations in the Caribbean, and they helped the Caribbeans develop some of the first true rums. And that's basically why Brian Kinsman, our master blender, has decided to basically commemorate their role, the role of the Irish people in the development of rum production in the Caribbean, by finishing an Irish whiskey in a rum cask. As I said, it's a triple blend, matured for between 5 to 6 years in the 3 barrels that I talked about, the B1s, the B2s, and the sherry butts. Triple distilled, triple cask matured, triple blended, and then finished in those rum casks to give it that kind of like tropical note. So we're quite curious to hear what you guys think of this one here. It's definitely, this one is, I should say, it's 43%, but you really, really don't taste it. Again, that's, I'd say it's probably, Brian Kinsman made that decision probably to kind of like counteract that sweetness that you get from the Guyanese Demerara rum cask finish. Fudge is definitely fudge, caramel, molasses, treacle. That's the kind of like type of sweetness that you pick up from this whiskey.
We got, Steph also says coffee as well, and we got licorice as well there. So yeah, you do get that treacle, that sweetness, but also yeah, I can see what they mean by that kind of coffiness as well, which I suppose can be a kind of a fudge toffiness too. Like, you know, they're not a million miles away from each other on the nose. Reverend Kim writes, it's certainly very fruity. Duncan, I can agree with the licorice. Again, sweet bananas to the fore rather than a simple licorice. I'd say Bassett's all sorts. Scott says, I drink a fair bit of dark and spiced rum, very fudge-like. So is it Caribbean or Caribbean, Conor?
I say Caribbean, I think. I'm not sure. I've never really been aware of that, but I think I mostly say Caribbean rum cask finish.
Yeah, no, that's that. So I would say it as well. And this was originally a duty free, was it? And then it was bought into the core range. Am I right?
That would have been before my time. But I know we've launched it. We launched this here over in the UK only 2 years ago. We actually launched it just before. Actually, it was just over 2 years ago. We launched it towards the end of 2019, and then obviously COVID kicked in. So it hasn't had the easiest time over here. So we're just trying to kind of roll it out now and trying to generate a bit of enthusiasm for the whiskey. I hosted a cocktail competition there with the Tully XO during the year, and it was very, very impressed with the entries we got over here in the UK. And that kind of like tells to or kind of speaks to the fact that it is a very versatile whiskey. I would encourage you all, if you're into mixing cocktails at home, and you're a big fan of a daiquiri or any other kind of rum-based drink, have a go using the Tully XO in place of like whatever your go-to white rum is.
Brilliant. Mr. Woodwinter would love a wee portion of coconut shrimp, or wee side portion of coconut shrimp. Duncan says tastes like porter on the finish, albeit stronger. That ties in maybe with the coffee notes as well. Kevin says not a GTR exclusive variant. So I was wrong there. I thought it began in that life in that way, but obviously no better man to know than Kevin. Reverend Kevin White says, let your imagination take you away to a Caribbean beach. Would go down well. This one's very good. Burnt honey, thick and full of flavor. Bananas, but not moist, says Mel. Brilliant. No, I do like this one. It's very, very easy drinking. And it's quite a good price point as well. If I double check what we have it at. £26 on the website with yeah, with a 15% discount on top of that, I mean, you're laughing, like, buy
Yeah.
6 of them, folks.
And as I'm sure you have all detected, it's very, very different from the 12-year that we've just tried. And again, it's going to be also very, very different from the original that Kevin is going to talk about. The original has kind of like more like fresh orchard fruits. I don't want to give the game away. The original is kind of like fresh orchard fruits, apples and pears. This is like has that kind of sweetness, like apples, stewed banana, treacle. And then the 12, which we tried, is that kind of like spice, praline, and nuttiness. So there's like a tremendous amount of variety in our range of blends, and that is due to the beauty of blend, what we call the beauty of blend. That's, because we are blending pot still, malt, and grain whiskey, we can kind of calibrate the flavor of the whiskey depending on what we want to go for. With the 12, we wanted spice, so we put more pot still in there, and we do triple cask maturations. We have more of the whiskey into those European oak casks because that adds a lot of spice to the whiskey. With this one here, we were going for more kind of fruitiness, more tropical notes, so we have like the rum cask finish. And then with the original, as Kevin's talking, which Kevin will talk about, and we're going for more kind of like fresh orchard fruits. And that's kind of like, it's Brian Kinsman's job. It's Brian Kinsman's job to kind of like calibrate each of the whiskeys depending on what the flavor profile that we're going for is.
That's brilliant. And Kevin's got some socials there for anyone to tag some posting. Scott says, I'd use this in a pina colada, which is a good shout. I can imagine it working really well with literal cream. And Reverend Kevin White goes, this would go so well over ice cream. I mean, at £26, it's cheaper than putting whatever you normally, chocolate sauce on your ice cream.
Yeah. And so I before I got this job, I was a cocktail bartender. I used to work at the Shelburne Hotel in Dublin, which is like a really fancy 5-star hotel. So if any of you want some good cocktail recipes or whatever, just like message me on my Instagram there. I'll sort you out.
And that's Friels of Barley.
Yeah. So Kevin has put my Instagram handle into the chat box there. If any of you want any cocktail ideas, feel free to message me and I'll sort you out.
Very good. No, that's an excellent tip. Shelburne is quite the bar.
I see someone's planning on making a pina colada. There's a bar in London called Coupette, and they make what's called a champagne pina colada. But what they use is, rather than using the coconut cream, which can be quite kind of thick and a bit messy, they use a coconut sorbet, and it gives the pina colada a lovely kind of lightness. And then they top it up with champagne then. But I'd say that's a very, very good tip if you want to make a pina colada, but you don't like working with cream because cream's messy and like some people don't like dairy. Coconut sorbet is a great substitute in place of the coconut cream, and it makes the drink kind of lighter rather than being like thick.
Yeah, it's probably good if you're calorie counting as well, like, No, that's excellent.
So those were the first of the blends that we're going to talk about. That was the 12-year and the XO. I'm now going to pass it over to Kevin, who I believe is in our blending lab.
Wait, before you do that, Conor, you've not done a toast for either of these.
Oh Jesus! Oh my God!
Kevin will kill you, like.
Yeah, God, lost the roll myself there. Okay, so I'll kick things off then with the toast. I'm gonna just pour myself a dram here. God, I've not even been drinking any of this myself. What am I doing? Depriving myself. Here we go. So I'm gonna go with my favorite toast. Here's to cheating, fighting, stealing, and drinking. If you cheat, may you cheat death. If you fight, may you fight for a noble cause. If you steal, may you steal someone's heart. And if you drink, may you drink with me. Sláinte.
Sláinte.
All the things you're good at, Conor.
Kevin, it's over to you to talk about the Tullamore DEW original blend.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I love to see in the chat some of those comments about the 12-year-old being that people loved it. I saw someone reference complexity. We're in our blending lab. This is where we bring people on tour. We show them we've got close to 1,000 samples of whiskey dating back as far as 1988. And we try and illustrate the components that make Tullamore DEW. We have these sort of flavor wheels, and we show the different components and the flavors they deliver. We use these German tools. They're called decanters. They're for nosing. Oh, didn't break it, thank God. And you use it a little like a perfume pump, and it sprays the aroma up. And we let people sort of understand each component of the blend because it is complex. So Tullamore definitely isn't easy to make. It's very easy to make a single malt, obviously hard to make a really good one, but we are making single malt, but we're also, as Conor alluded to, making two other styles of whiskey. We're finishing them in this different combination of casks and then blending it all together to get this exact precision and consistency every time. So just like a really good chef in your local restaurant delivering a really good meal on a Friday night, that he can do it every single Friday night. Our recipe with this actually changes. So I always thought the recipe and the percentage would be the exact same, but the master blender would tell me, oh, if the sherry butts come in and they're more intense, we might reduce the amount of that so it doesn't overpower some of the vanilla coming through from the bourbons. So it's really interesting to think that it actually constantly evolves and tweaks, probably 5% thereabouts of the components. This whiskey is probably my favorite in the range. Some people don't like me saying that because they always want it to be the most expensive one, the hardest one to get, the one you can't get anymore. But for me, I love this whiskey because it's just, I guess it's something I'm very familiar with, but it's got so much going on. For me, I think Conor touched on orchard fruits. I always talk about green apple. We've got some apples here to sort of bring the visual stimulus of tasting notes to life. We always talk about like digestive biscuits and some of that character that comes through. A little bit like oaky vanilla notes, honey-like sweetness. It's a very light, easy drinking whiskey. In the 70s, they had light actually on the bottle. And it was kind of to articulate that it wasn't a peated Islay Scotch. For people who didn't want something that heavy, it was very easy drinking, despite having this myriad of different components. So that sort of like white pepper spice on the nose, but still at 40%, delivering this sort of lovely sort of silkiness to it. I'm really interested what people think of this one. I think it's great because for someone who wants to learn about Irish whiskey, you're able to taste a glass of whiskey that has all three in it. And I put it in the chat there about the column still coming in the late 40s, 48, 49 is when Desmond brought it in. So the blend came online between 3 and 5 years later. So probably early 1954 was realistic. So we were the original triple blend. Were we the first blended whiskey? I don't know if we actually were in Ireland, but none of those brands that did go into blending exist anymore. So I guess of the brands that exist in the world of Irish whiskey, we're probably the oldest blend that I can think of. I don't know.
Because I know Paddy and Cork Distillers, Paddy and Middleton. I know I'm not saying it was before them, but it was quite early in the 20th century that they did it as well.
So Paddy would have been a double blend for a lot of its history. Only recently did it become a triple blend.
Oh, so you were saying specifically with the three components rather than being the first blended whiskey?
Correct, yes.
Right.
So sorry, one of our blends we'd say like an original triple blend. So using all three components, because absolutely people were blending. They had taken from Scotland this theory of putting in this sort of what I always describe as like the pizza base, which is the grain whiskey on itself, not super interesting, but then you layer your pepperoni, your salami, or for your pineapple people, I'm sorry, those components are the malts and the pot still that sort of make it interesting. So Tully was really about that. You're right though, Paddy is a triple blend as well. Probably more focused on bourbon barrels. They don't typically use sherry. We use sherry in all of our whiskies, and that's just part of our cask spreadsheet.
Oh, this is a much better whiskey than Paddy.
I wouldn't say that. It's just a different palate. My granddad loved Paddy. They're just very different whiskies. It just depends what you like. So
I wasn't actually knocking Paddy. I was just, trying to bring back the focus to the brand that we're doing tonight,
No, that's fine. But it's useful to give context and reference because, you hear people, obviously we work with Tullamore DEW, so we're going to highlight, but it's useful to talk and contextualize comments because people do drink a multitude of brands and it's useful for them to know how it would be different to that style. I'd love to do a longer toast, if that's okay, if that's permitted. I'm going to do one that's called The Lament of the Irish Pub. And it's about the sort of beautiful pubs that we have speckled across the land of Ireland. I do give a dig to an English pub chain, so I'm sorry if I offend anyone. Hopefully you'll all agree and you're not fans of Wetherspoons. So here you go. Take a seat and a sip and I'll bring you on a splendid trip. A stroll up the road, a gentle rum, I'll bring you into my second home. Charismatic, enigmatic, dogmatic, sometimes even dog-friendly. It's lighthearted and wholehearted, so let's get started. It's where banter beats the band and the band beats the bowrun. Anything for an old song. From Mullockmore to Tullamore, speckled across this land, with pubs more difficult to escape than quicksand.
a place for daydreams and dream days. GA heads with sore heads, rugby buffs, soccer toughs, the almost nearly never enoughs. Splendid soaking rays on sunny days often saved us on rainy days. Pub economics sponsored by Guinness. Bar stools and barflies, drunk lads and wise guys. No ivory towers here, just men hiding from the fear. It's a lock-in, but you're locked out. The Gardaí, the Irish Guards, the police, knock to end the stout. Full of tales and fables and occasional dancing on the tables. The Irish pub needs no Wetherspoon sub. It's been often imitated, never bettered, and this storm will be weathered. So I'll leave you with this, bid you adieu, glasses up to some more gin.
Marvelous.
I write Tinder chat up lines as well if anyone's interested and needs that service.
Well, you do have some toast or spoken word kind of videos online. Where could anyone interested find them, Kevin?
On YouTube, Kevin Pigott, Pigott. Over the top, you'll find poems, a different one. So I do videos along with poems. I'm actually doing another one in Dublin next week. So just tries to bring the poems can be a bit dry, they can be a bit too wordy. So I like to excite people with visuals that accompany it to give a greater sense of what I'm speaking to. But really excited to have been involved tonight. Hope you liked getting a little insight to our distillery. I think if you follow our YouTube, you'll see a 10-minute virtual distillery that I've done. If you follow sort of Conor's cocktail page on Instagram, he has a lot of great recipes for different drinks, and it's just a great resource. Any of your whiskey needs, you know where to go. Luke is the man. So great to have him over in the UK, helping to promote Irish whiskey and sort of giving it that opportunity to share its voice and to get people to try Irish whiskey. So for anyone who Irish whiskey was their first drink tonight, or their first Irish whiskey in a while, really happy to have you. And for those who are even more familiar, great to have you too.
No, it's brilliant. Thank you, Kevin, and thanks, Conor. It's been fantastic. That was really well said, Kevin. It's been a really unique experience. I really hope everyone's enjoyed it, and genuinely, not just saying this because you're on. It's worth checking out those videos. You're very talented at the poetry, Kevin. We're just going to read out some of the comments that came in there while we were sipping that last dram, or Tushgone. Mel says, "Open my taste buds to Irish whiskey. Excellent value for money. Well impressed up to now." Duncan says, "Absolutely, Mel. I've been overlooking Irish whiskey to my detriment. A fine toast," says Scott. Well said. Very informative and fun evening. Ian says, "Green apples on the nose, definitely, but peaches and apricots. Starting with apples, then a little tang of gooseberry or rhubarb, maybe rhubarb fool with the steward in it. It has Jeff. My first time doing this. Feel comfortable and learning a lot. Sweet young apples, mashed sweet potatoes, fruit gums. Soutard equals custard in my above post." There you go. Duncan claps, and so does David. Licorice, blackjacks, butter, honey, and then I've put in the discount code. It's WS15VTTD. WS15VTTD. You'll find it in the chat there, and I'll repost it again now just because it's moved up a bit. That'll get you 15% off all the drams we tried tonight. For the next few days, up until the 15th of September, actually, but you're better off getting it out the way now so you don't forget. That's all except the Rouge, which obviously we're not stocking. It's a duty-free exclusive, so it was a good opportunity to try it. Kevin says, "Really impressed by Irish whiskies, especially TD this evening. It's great. Great evening, fantastic toasts and whiskies. I'm sure there was a rap record in there," Kevin says. Mel, "This is a great tasting tonight, guys. Thank you so much. The virtual tour was a fantastic experience. Great idea. No experience of Irish whiskey, but now a great fan." So that's brilliant. That's absolutely marvelous. Is there anything you wanted to add, either Conor or Kevin, before we finish up?
Conor, anything from you?
I would just like to remind people again that our distillery is now open to the public. So if you are on holidays in Ireland, it's not too far from Dublin. It's only about like an hour in the train, I'd say. Kevin, is that it? And
Yeah,
even the town of Tullamore.
from-
Yeah, and the town of Tullamore itself is beautiful. It's a quaint little Irish town. Lots of great pubs in Tullamore. Obviously, our fantastic distillery. There's the Slieve Bloom Mountains nearby if you like out for hikes or walks. There's just a lot to do in the town, so it's definitely worth a visit. And it's, as I said, not too far from Dublin.
Yeah, the new tour covers, it's a full tour site. So you pass the bottling hall, you're outside the cooperage, you go into the warehouse, you actually take whiskey from the barrel on the tour, and then it finishes kind of in the gift shop. So for those who are interested and want to blend their own whiskey, they can do that too. We start with the history of the Irish coffee, Tullamore Dew's connection with it, sort of the debate of who made the first Irish coffee, where was it really made, and some of that fascinating history. So yeah, I'd love to see something someday.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm a big Irish coffee enthusiast myself, as I think you might know, Kevin. So yeah, no, that's brilliant. Where do you settle down in it? Are you a Fines guy, or are you a San Francisco guy?
Myself?
Yeah, on where it was first made. Was it in Shannon or Fines, or was it in San Francisco? Or
so it was popularized in San Francisco. 100% wasn't made there. They don't even try and claim that. It was popularized in sort of the early 50s, 1952. The Buena Vista opens up, and then it starts a bit after that. In 54, you start to see more of the Irish coffee sort of serve coming into play. Stanton Della playing, this San Francisco journalist writing about it from the San Francisco Chronicle. The earlier records you see tend to be in the Dolphin Hotel in Dublin. And then you see a reference then of sort of the sort of whiskey and coffee making its way by Jim Sheridan, this bartender / chef, who then moves down to Foynes and puts the cream on it. It's the final touch. Looks like 1943. There's a really good book. There's a few good books out there about it from the guys at the Dead Rabbit. I debate some of the comments in it, but the Martin Hudak, bartender who used to be based in the UK, has a book, Spiritual Coffee. He has a chapter about the Irish coffee as well. But yeah, it's I don't know. I always laugh that I don't think we'll ever know who made the very first Irish coffee. It was someone's mother in a kitchen, and we'll never know what the first one was. But lots of brands will claim it. We weren't the first Irish coffee for sure, but the guy who became the most famous for it did give us his recommendation. So I wasn't my girlfriend's first kiss, but as long as I'm her recommendation, I'll take that.
Brilliant.
When you think of an Irish coffee, it's got fat, sugar, cream, fat, sugar, caffeine, and alcohol, which are like what most of the world runs on. Is it like fat in the cream, obviously, sugar in the sugar syrup, caffeine in the coffee, and then alcohol in the whiskey. So
there's got to be a level of acid in the coffee as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's so much going on in just that one drink. It's probably no wonder it's such a popular drink, and served all over the world.
No, it's when done well. The problem with the Irish coffee is, I'm sure both of you would agree, is you get them butchered in so many places that people's reference to it is often a bad Irish coffee, which is like, a tall glass with like way too much coffee and the cream's out of a spray can or something, that you can get some awful versions. So a lot of people have never had a proper Irish coffee. So it's worth having one that's actually made with care, it's great.
So we're actually trying to tackle that problem here in the UK. We're going to release these cream whippers. They're kind of like basically protein shakers with a kind of ball in them to kind of help people texturize the cream. But the other big tip is if you're going to use cream, try and use cream with a fat percentage between 30% to 40%. That is the kind of fat percentage that will allow you to texturize it perfectly so that the cream floats on top and doesn't sink to the bottom, doesn't get too lumpy. Because if you use a double cream that's about 50%, it can get very, very lumpy, and the cream will just like sink to the bottom. And if you use a single cream that's too thin, it will just mix with the drink.
Conor has a video on his Instagram making it, and there's one on the Tullamore DEW website as well if anyone's interested to see. And feel free to message us if you've you're struggling with any element. We'll help you out.
Yeah, those protein shakers for whipping are great. I have one. It's branded with another Irish whiskey brand, but I won't mention it. But yeah, it's a great way to go. I used to always just use an empty bottle, like something like this, and just. But yeah, anything that thickens it a small bit so that it kind of rests a bit better is definitely the way to go. Brilliant, lads. Thank you so much for your time. And if there's any questions we didn't get to at the end, folks, that you want to get answered, just drop it an email to the email you got this link from. Please do get on. Steve says there, Luke made Irish coffees with PX, as you suggested. Excellent. So that was the recipe we used in the Celtic Whiskey Bar. Yeah, was to replace the sugar with this very sweet Pedro Jimenez sherry, and it just adds a layer of complexity to it. It's brilliant. So no, that's fantastic, gents. Thanks very much, and hopefully we might have you on again at some point down the line.
Be delighted to do this again.
Thanks
thanks very much for having us.
Brilliant. Cheers, lads. We'll see you. Bye, everyone.
All the best, folks. Enjoy the rest of the whiskey.